Hello, everyone. Um, I'm thrilled to be here with Daryl. And today I'm going to talk a little, well, we're going to talk a little about microlearning and we can use it to supplement traditional learning. So what that leads us to begin with is to identify what is microlearning. And, there's a lot of definitions for it. I like one of the simplest one, which is from the International Data Corporation. They say we define microlearning quite simply as the delivery of bite-sized content nuggets. I like that because it really does say what it is. However, a more complex definition that I got from Exonify is microlearning is an approach to training that delivers content in short, focused bites. To be effective, microlearning must fit naturally into the daily workflow. That's why I like this definition. Engage employees in voluntary participation, be based in brain science, adapt continually to ingrain the knowledge employees need to be successful, and ultimately drive behaviors that impact specific business results. So that's a mouthful. My definition for it is that I see that microlearning is more than just a collection of small learning nuggets. It is also the time in between or baby steps that is necessary to achieve proficiency in the desired new skill or behavior. So to me, microlearning is taking content, breaking it down, yes, into naturally small sizes. But you can't just throw that at people. You also have to do it in the right format, in the right order, but with time in between for people to actually apply, practice the principles that they learn from the one nugget. The way I like to think about it is no one becomes a concert pianist after 3 days of fire hose piano lessons. No one becomes a professional tennis player by going to a week camp and being fire hosed with, the basics of tennis. Everything related to the human experience requires us to learn in bite sizes, manageable bite sizes that doesn't cause cognitive load. And as soon as cognitive load occurs, our brain shuts down. It's just too much to handle. But we need to learn in these small pieces and then allow time in between to practice and to apply it and to fail, to be honest with you, in those things. Like when you're playing the guitar, you're not going to get the sound of those chords right every time. You're going to have to practice and practice. And then you're going to have your coach come after a week, say, how did you do on the chords I gave you? Show me. And you'll show, and they will give you coaching and improvement, and then build on the next principle. That's microlearning. And by the way, just because we have a new term, which it's not that new, but it's been around for a few years, it doesn't mean the principle's new. This concept of learning in small pieces, in bite sizes, in micro pieces over time has been around since man has started learning, whether it was learning how to make the wheel or whatever it is. You would have an apprentice and you would slowly learn things over time. So that is my take on what microlearning is. And the reason why it works is because it naturally fits how the human brain works. We make associations, we require information to be input, and then the time to apply it and make it relevant to ourselves. And that's why it works when done correctly, is that it fits in with how we just naturally operate and how our brains like to process and learn. So that is my answer to the question, Stephanie.
So in case she's not able to speak up, let me just, thinking about that definition, first off, I'm amazed with all the people that are coming in globally. I've seen Italy, Costa Rica, just everywhere across the board. So thank you all for joining. That's awesome. That is a very comprehensive definition of microlearning. And I think a question that we might entertain is, when I was doing some research for this subject, I saw some people writing articles about, it's not really here to stay. There's so many reasons why it fails. And I just want to kind of boil down, what are some reasons why microlearning, as we've described it, might fail when you're using that as a learning strategy? Let me just take it back to the basics. I'm going to assume many people on this webinar are instructional designers. So why will it fail? When instructional designers forget that they're instructional designers. You think about all those things that Treyon mentioned, and you imagine trying to cram so many learning objects in a single nugget, in that small bite-sized piece of information. Or what about if you're creating content that really doesn't fit into some kind of a critical purpose or a goal? It's not action oriented. There's not a way to measure whether or not this thing was successful. Or maybe somebody tries to use microlearning as their complete strategy, and it's all focused on building knowledge and skills at a deep level. Now, microlearning by itself isn't necessarily going to be able to do that. So you have to recognize this is one part of an overall learning strategy. And cognitive psychology is complex. There's a lot of pieces that are involved. I'm sure Treyon's going to speak about adaptive learning, neuroscience, whatever, a little bit as we move along. But if you think about how we process information, we have to remember those things as instructional designers and identify those learning objectives first. Remember to isolate into single teaching points, and don't just focus on, microlearning, short, sweet, simple. Let's just keep it at 3 to 5 minutes and we're good. That's not really the answer of what microlearning is. So it's a very complex thing. It's probably easier to list a million reasons why it might not work. But if you really think about it, it's always going to boil down to, did you think about the learner first, what they needed to do, when they needed to do it, what type of person they were, what type of environment they were, the learning preferences, all those things that are involved in putting together a comprehensive learning strategy to begin with. And so let me continue that a little bit, Treyon, if I may, and then you can build on it. And that is, so again, I mentioned during the research that I was seeing some things that were indicating, there is a body of population out there in our domain, our community, that kind of looks at microlearning as a passing fad. So let me just ask this and think about it yourself. Has ADDIE gone away? I remember many years ago being taught ADDIE in my master's program. And then years later, I get told, well, ADDIE's not really relevant anymore. We don't do it that way. It's rapid development and all these different iterations. And I would just say, I don't believe that microlearning is a fad. I believe that learning is evolving and it will continue to evolve. And how we use different components of conveying information, keeping in mind cognitive psychology, that brings microlearning into our technology portfolio, our strategy, our content development. So if you want to put together a comprehensive learning program and your desire is to go out and motivate and engage learners, then go and learn something basic about neuroscience and consider microlearning as one of your modality choices. And one last point, and then I'll hand it over to Treyon, is think about how we all work today. Some of you may be doing this now, multitasking. So multitasking isn't all bad. There's places for microlearning where multitasking and the tendency to do that it just lays right out naturally for microlearning, because microlearning drives to reinforce continuous learning. And the things that Treyon spoke about, it's more effective when it's done often. It's easily consumable. And people can use blended learning and flipping a classroom, all these things that are very time efficient. But ultimately, we have to remember all of us now are very super efficient learners. And what matters for us is information has to be delivered to us just enough, just in time, just for me. And where that's the case, microlearning works. So I don't think it's a fad. It's here to stay. Treyon, I pass it over to you.
Thank you, Daryl. And I love what you've been saying about this concept of microlearning and how it really is here to stay. Here's something to keep in mind. None of us are the same. None of us learn the same. None of the situations that you all in that are attending is the same, meaning you have responsibilities for certain types of training, for a specific type of employee or organizational member or whatever it is. And when we think of microlearning and other buzzwords, sometimes we get thrown by the buzzword, and we get thrown by things like gamification. oh, we got to have gamification, we got to have micro learning, and we've got to throw in some VR there. And so we start using terms in broad sweeps. And if you think of micro learning as truly just taking content and yes, breaking it down, but it's different in how you then supplement the learning experience. Everyone's different. And so what I want to be careful of is, as we talk today, be careful of generalities, because if I were to look, and we're going to take some time at the end of the session, by the way, we call it group massage, where we're going to ask some of you to volunteer some challenges and opportunities that you have as it relates to microlearning. And then we can open it up, that question you have on how best to do it, to the group. And we'll show how all of you have great experience with this already. This is not a complicated concept. Microlearning isn't complicated. We either make it too complicated or we oversimplify it sometimes by saying, oh, everything's broken up, I'll just dish it out there to everyone. That's also, it needs to be held together by connective tissue. And that's where instructional design comes in. There's a place to have it. We either put it before a learning experience, the virtual experience or a live experience? Do you put it during, over space time? Do you do it after? Is it something that you do all three, before, during, and after, as a reinforcement, as preparation, as ways to test people's proficiency? So microlearning can come in so many different forms. It's not just content. It could come in the form of an assessment. Microlearning could come in the form of a reinforcement, where it's reinforcing a principle and seeing how you have applied it. It could come as in the form of accountability. So there's so many different things we can do. Just be careful of the buzzword and the general statements with microlearning, because it doesn't always apply to your specific situation. That takes just thinking creatively. So I just wanted to add that in there. Daryl, any other thoughts there?
No, I totally agree.
Yeah. And I love what Samishna said. These joggers actually make things complicated sometimes, but once we get the mechanism cleared, it's very efficient. You're right. Great way to put it. Thank you for sharing, because it really is, it's simple, but we want to talk about, so far we just talked in generalities about what is microlearning. Is it a fad? Some people are saying it's not working. Well, that's because, as Daryl said, they're not using it correctly. You're not putting it together in the right connective learning experience. Microlearning by itself is not going to do anything. It's like taking an innate object and just putting it on a table, and it's not going to work for you until you pick it up and turn it on. And the same thing applies. You have to patch it together. You have to build it, create it into an experience that will work for you. And it works differently for different people. And we'll talk about that. The nice thing about microlearning, it becomes adaptable based on the specific needs of the learners that are out there. So sorry, Daryl, I'm rambling.
No, you're perfectly fine. I do think about something though on the jargon. I spent 12 years in Navy nuclear submarines. I can tell you what, that's a land of jargon. So yes, and if you're not part of that land and you're expected to benefit from that, it's mumbo jumbo. So totally agree with the jargon.
Well, let's jump into that second session and section, which is first aid. We call it first aid because it's best practices. So I've already spoken how you can do this well, this microlearning, and it truly does come down to instructional design. And I love how this world of instructional design has adapted and changed. And I think, Daryl, you said it best. I have a master's degree in instructional design, learning science, and I'm in a PhD program right now just studying that. I'm also pulling heavily from cognitive sciences and neuroscience, obviously the social sciences and behavioral sciences. And I love the fact that there's this overlapping congruity. It's amazing how we can learn from all the research that's gone out there. But one of the things that is very basic is you do it well. And Daryl, you said this, and I want to reinforce this. The way you do it, microlearning well, is that you ensure that you balance as an instructional designer, if that's who you are, you balance the learning objectives. Now, there's always a learning objective. What are the competencies or the skills you want someone to learn? You balance that with the learner realities. And that's, Daryl, what you were mentioning earlier on. You have to keep the learner at the center and in mind with everything you do, because you might have a learning objective, and that's great. But if you build a learning experience that doesn't fit the learner reality, meaning the day-to-day reality. How do they function? If you're creating something that's on a mobile phone for them, but they don't have a mobile phone that they can use, that's a bad design. If you're creating something for just a computer, but they're a pharmaceutical rep out on the road all the time, and they don't necessarily want the computer with them, or it's not easy to use, that's not a great design. That's a learner reality that you have to balance with learning objectives. That's how you do it well. You not only do you connect the pieces of microlearning with the right connective tissue, instructional design, which is basically, you guys know there's a storyboarding or outlines that is connected together. With technology nowadays, you can do a lot of cool things and create these learning experiences in ways that it's pretty intuitive, and you put everything on there, but also you want to make sure that when you build it and you design it, you keep those two pieces in mind.
Yeah, that's great. You know what? I'm going to show an example, which we talked about, but there was one of the chat comments came up. Hi, Noah. One of the comments came up that I think is important for us to remember, and that's empathy with the learner. So along with that learner centricity, that empathy is so important, recognizing the learners and where they are. So I'm going to bring, I've got my SailPoint screen here. I work at SailPoint, as you heard in the introduction. There's not a one size fits all way to use microlearning, but I'm going to show an example. And this is, we're in a, this is a learning journey for us. We've got a learner centric journey. We're using technology, trying to use best practices, ideas, being learner in the middle of how we use it. And I'm going to show you an example from Identity University. But I also want to mention something that Trayon just said about, the pharmaceutical rep. Well, you may also be part of a sales enablement team. So we have two different organizations within SailPoint that are using microlearning. I happen to run the technical product training side. There's also a sales enablement side, which branded as Seaworthy Academy. And what they do, they use everything is mobile first. It's all microlearning. They use gamification. You advance through ranks like Navy ranks in the Navy, SailPoint, shipping, all those kind of things, put those terminology similes together. And you can imagine progressing through the sales enablement learning process to become skilled at that role. There's a lot of constant reinforcement. There's coaching, there's over the shoulder, but everything is done microlearning. So that's one way. On the technical side, which I'll show you in a minute, I'm actually going to take you into Identity University. We break our microlearning into 4 different parts. We use concept type information. We use how-tos. Think of going out to YouTube and say, how do I build a lemon battery, whatever it may be. I had to do that with my kids once. Maybe you did too. There's infographics and there's games using gamification and gaming theory. The other thing that we will do is we do quick learns a lot. We have a commercial offering for it where I use it to do post-formal training reinforcement. So there's that sweet spot where you've got your formal training where you try to do the 80-20 to get implementation teams who are installing and configuring and putting your product in play. And then you've got product documentation. You may have all other sources of information, but these quick learns can come in and fill a nugget that is real world point in time, right where the problems are. Maybe there's a certain set of support tickets that come in and you notice a trend and you can go out and identify, look, I can put together a 3 or 4 minute quick how to do something to overcome this and reduce call center ticket volume, that type of thing. There's all types of ways that you can use it. The other one is, again, as I will show you, is we also are in a journey to begin embedding our quick learns within our formal instructor-led training or e-learning content. We have to figure some of that out, but blended learning, everybody does blended learning in some way, form, or fashion, whether you realize it or not. You might be using flipped classroom. For us, we're on a blended learning journey, and we use the quick learns for specific purposes for very targeted audiences. So I'm going to just share my screen here. And don't take this as I'm not trying to pitch my courses or anything to you. I'm just giving you an example. So this is Identity University. I want to show you quick learns again are what we brand microlearning as. Microlearning, again, to the point that Trayon made, that's jargon. To anybody outside of the education or learning and development domain, that's mumbo jumbo. So quick learns is something, it speaks to what it is. You're going to learn something quickly. It's a small piece of information. So up here, you can go through and you'll see the ways that I have training structured. I've got product training, there's some identity program training, and then there's quick learns. And we organize these. This is mostly for your post-formal training, continuing education, that down and dirty, I've got a problem. I want to have an expert on my shoulder that I can just go to real quick, find my topic, and learn something fast. So we put groupings of like content together in series. And this is going to show you all the different series that we have right now. And then a series is a combination of quick learns. So I just want to take you back to one that we're focused on right now, our AI services product. So here's a series. And if a learner clicks into this series, they're going to see a whole lot of individual quick learns. Now, these quick learns range anywhere from 3 minutes. There might be some that are 10 minutes. They're going to be concept. They're going to be how-to. They're going to be an infographic. Might be a game. I don't have any games in this particular one. But an individual can go through and you can see the type of topics. These are not your, hey, please describe a bicycle to me. These are very specific topics that are associated with our particular product. And then another thing that I want to take you to is I want to show you in a learning path how we might use these. So we put together some training paths to kind of guide people into, based on the product, how you might want to go and consume the training. Just a recommendation. Very simple, nothing uber complex here. We use your traditional e-learning, we use instructor-led, and we have quick learns. So we're going to show a linearity path that allows somebody to go through, if they're an implementation person or they're administering the product, and they're going to go through and learn what they need to do a design and build phase 1 implementation of our technology. There will be references to quick learns in these individual pieces of content, but then down at the bottom, inside the training path, you're going to see a call out that a learner might be able to go and, hey, I want to find out something advanced about the Identity Now product. Oh, look, they've got some information on search. How about extending the capability of Identity Now? And these series are going to continue to grow, and quick learns will continue to grow. I have over 70 of them in the library right now, probably on track to somewhere between 100 to 150 by the end of the year, hopefully more. I use a third-party vendor that works with us to help us scale, and we work with them on the instructional design, the production, the development, and the release of this. So it offers an opportunity for people to have a recommended training path, quick learn type content within the individual courses. Once they're done with the training, they have an ability to go in and find out even more about deeper subjects that are going to continually reinforce, think lifelong learning. This is how I'm using it. Let me pass that over to you, Trey, see what kind of comments you might have.
Oh, I love that. And here's something to keep in mind. When it comes to training in general, I'm a minimalist. And the reason for that is, you know your employees, you know yourself. We are busy, they are busy. So we have a difficult task, right? For one thing, we have a job in which we need to ensure that our employees receive the necessary skills, competencies, whatever you want to call it, so that they can do their jobs better, so that you can not only check a box, but hopefully you can show how the training that you've included or that you have is getting the behavior change that is actually impacting bottom line. Now, that's the ideal. But even if you can check the box with confidence and say, yes, my employees are getting the right kind of behavior change, good learning experiences that are made up of microlearning, like the stuff that Daryl showed you, here's the challenge. They're busy. And training has been a bad four-letter word for many, many years because of the poor e-learning stuff that we've had to work with. Now that's changed. The quality has improved substantially, like you've seen with Daryl's. But people have also this conditioning, which is just tell me what to do. So I like the prescriptive option that SailPoint has, because some people they don't want to have to go through options. So but it's still done in microlearning. When I asked Daryl about this, when we went over it, I said, what about the pieces that you have there in the prescriptive learning, right, Daryl? That's still created as bite sizes so that people can take it over time, correct?
Yep, we have several ways of delivering the training. If there's an instructor-led training that might be a 3-day course, we'll also break it up into individual smaller chunks, which have smaller chunks within it, of course, staying with true instructional design. But we break it up because companies have churn. They have people leave the company. And if the product's already implemented, well, we don't need to train them how to install and configure it and implement it again. We need to train those administrators who have a task to do. They may be dealing with password management, provisioning, search, compliance, whatever. They don't need, in the beginning were dinosaurs. Let me tell you about everything. All they care about is, what do I need to do right now because somebody's breathing over my shoulder.
Most people want to do that. And look at some of the great comments in the Noah's making, Gideon's making. People are asking for this because they don't want to sit for days and hours in front of a computer and or in person to get training when they have a job to do. So the nice thing about microlearning, it does meet them where they are. And that leads us to the next question, Daryl, which is, let's talk about this concept that you started to go into with your example, which is this more of an adaptive option. So I like to think of AI version 1 standing for augmented intelligence, because I don't think we fully, as an industry, have achieved artificial intelligence, which I think is AI version 2. Because artificial intelligence is truly where the system, the computer, the technology is thinking for you and anticipating for you. We do have augmented, which could also mean adaptive or machine learning, right? We know that that's happening successfully. And the nice thing is, if, like you said, if someone's already been through something, guess what they don't want to do? They don't want to be forced to go through that training again. So, Daryl, what do you recommend that, what approach do you think we take there using microlearning?
So I did spend 5 years at a AI startup company before coming to SailPoint. So I totally appreciate where you're coming from on the augmented intelligence. The ability, if you can imagine a world where somebody is entering a training environment, what matters, who they are, what their role is, what their job is, and what the expectation is of the outcome. And if there's a way to use the machine learning and blend those 3 concentric circles together to get a single nucleus at the center and direct your training to focus on that, guess what? If you are able to take advantage of that, you're going to be able to handle the uniqueness of every learner out there, because engaging with training is always a choice. And so if they choose, and your search is good and your tagging is good, and all of these things that you've thought about when putting together this strategy, especially if you're really conscientiously focusing on the learner, you're going to deliver what they want when they want it. And that's really all that matters. I'm going to keep going back repeatedly to that learner-centric modality. It doesn't matter which one of these micro-learning treatments you use. Most people use video. I did see, I'm not able to keep up with the chats fast enough, but I saw a question come through about, do my quick learns have a lot of interactivity? No, because if you're thinking about why is somebody going to a concept type or a how-to type or an infographic, I already know what I'm looking for. Yep. And so I'm going to go in there, and there may be a lot of stuff that is not exactly what I want or worded differently, but I just want that piece of information, and then I'm going to take action on it. The ones where we bring in the interactivity is our games. So, and you can use gamification in any number of ways. You can have in a community site, like we're kind of talking about inside, you might put a whole bunch of games together and use that to generate interest. Hey, wow, I think I know a lot. People like playing games. Let's go put some stuff together, generate interest, and that might drive activity or interaction with other entities within the ecosystem. But for us, we use it to reinforce. Did you learn something? Or did you just learn that the emperor has no clothes and you might want to consider some training? Either one of those options is good.
Yeah. And Daryl, I love what you said about the interactivity. And that's a good question. Here's where sometimes the traditional instructional design thinking that we've been trained on collides with the reality of how the human brain likes to process and learn. Sometimes we build authoring tools with bells and whistles that are not always necessary. And think about the Google mindset that we all are now conditioned. If we have a question, we have a just-in-time question, we want a just-in-time answer, even if it isn't a complete one yet. So here's the benefit. This concept of microlearning is what we do every day when we have a question. Like, what is the UV index? I'm on vacation, right? So I have kids. So what is the UV index going to be today here in St. George, Utah? And it'll tell me, it'll show me. That is me having a just-in-time question with a just-in-time answer. Is that learning? Absolutely, it's learning. It's learning in micro-learning or bite sizes. So what happens if I ask that question and I get a drag and drop that gives me random information about St. George weather over the last 10 years before I get my answer? I am going to be peeved because I don't care about knowing about the last 10 years. I want to know the answer to my question, my learning question, to be now. So we have to change our paradigms when we think about our learners. I call them mutant learners. I believe we have all become mutant learners. There's no such thing as anyone being a traditional or one-size-fits-all learner. We are mutating at such a dramatic rate because of the new technologies, the new social media, the video that learning we receive, Google. There's so many ways that we are mutating how we consume information that if we've got to be careful that as instructional designers, we don't force unnecessary interactions and bells and whistles on people when it's not needed. So that's why Daryl said it perfectly. He says he likes to think about his learners with every interaction. Put yourself in their head. What are they looking for in that moment? What do they want? So here's where adaptive learning comes in, guys. And I know some of you get in, you spoke about it being EPSS, sorry, electronic performance support systems. That's one example, absolutely, of adaptive learning, right? But keep in mind that it's different for every group and every different person. But if you build a micro-learning engine, a database of solutions and answers that people can plumb or access later, so now we're doing things a little differently. There's a traditional learning experience, which we want to definitely apply micro-learning to. But then think of using those same micro-learning pieces you've created or nuggets, and then you use it for people afterwards because they're going to forget, or you use it afterwards as a reinforcement tool to send to them in bite-sized reinforcement over time, or that they can access just in time to receive answers. Now you're utilizing your learning, your instructional design smartly on a system, on a platform with a Google mindset and conditioning in mind. So
can I add something, Trent? I think one of my team members is on the call, Sylvia Sakula. I was talking with her this week, and she mentioned an example that she used in a previous presentation that she was doing out in the e-learning guild. And I think it's relevant here. I have two things to share about. One is, if you think that micro-learning is just something new, let me give you an example that she gave me, which is, think about the TV guide. I used to only subscribe to a newspaper for the sports pages, the Sunday coupons, and the TV guide. So the TV guide is a form of micro-learning. I want to know what's on this channel at this time. And I thought that was an excellent example. The other, going back to that interactivity, tying off of what you said, is when people are coming in for these bite-sized nuggets of information that's just enough, just in time, just for me, centered on their need, they're not looking for a training experience. So we do not put a bunch of Q&A in a micro-learning where somebody treating it like a traditional training course where we're trying to determine, did you learn something? That's not my problem. My problem is making sure I understood who you were, why you were asking this, what your question was, and I answered the question. I don't need you to raise your hand and check, and me to tell you the answer, and then check to see if you got the answer. That will drive people insane and is a complete wrong way of using micro-learning. So keep that in mind. This is not your typical training intervention where it's tell, did they get it? Ask if they got it, test them at the end. It's not like that.
And, Krista on the chat makes a great point. She's playing devil's advocate. And I I love devil's advocates because it helps us all think differently. And Krista, you're saying, some of the research, if you were to just take microlearning and use it as your training by itself, it would fail because it's dead. It's not dynamic. It in and of it, like Google, for example, if you don't go in and ask Google questions, it's not going to work. It's not going to help you in any fashion. So what we're not saying here, by the way, is that microlearning is the panacea and answer to all learning woes. We're saying if used correctly as a supplement, as reinforcement, as preparation, as application over time, that if you build your training and learning experience with that in mind, so microlearning is one part of the learning experience. It's not the learning experience. It's one.
You have to remember, it may not have contextual relevance. That training path that I showed you earlier, that's relevance in context. It's a story.
Yes.
Microlearning is a piece of information. If you think about information mapping, yes, there's tie-ins in the nodes and all the relationships amongst the content at some level, but each piece of content stands alone. And you can group like kind as we do, or you could treat them as a catalog of microlearning with a great search capability.
So, and I'm looking at some of the chat, and there's some really good information going on there. It's very hard when you're hosting.
Yeah, I don't get to see it.
But I do like where this is going. There's some questions about, how do you track, how do you report on microlearning? If you're using it, is it the technology, the LMS? So I want to take a step back. I want to say, here's the question that Daryl, you and I can answer for the folks that are listening, is let's think of it. How do we create microlearning experiences and be able to show that it's working? Okay. So I like to think of it as this way. So I created one of the projects I worked on in a previous job where we stood up an LMS. We didn't build it, obviously, we off-the-shelf LMS. But what we did was we used it differently because you're right. Sometimes people use the term like courses and curriculum and modules. And there's this general thought of, okay, a course is this thing and a module is that. So change your thinking for a second. So we identified, we were in the project management business. So we identified 29 of the most common pain points / jobs to be done that a project manager will need to know the answer to. And we knew that because the company had been in business for 40 years. So we knew, and we were quickly able to identify, it happened to be 29. I'm not saying that's the number, but for project managers, we realized, this just take a brainstorming session, work with SMEs. And I wrote out, it's a love-hate relationship because they think they're also experts of adult learning, but they're not always. But we worked on identifying what the jobs to be done were, meaning what are the most common things that a project manager will need to know or that they will have challenges with to do their job well. And we posed it in a jobs to be done question. Now, jobs to be done theory is from Clayton Christensen. He was a Harvard business professor, wrote several books, and one of them on this jobs theory. But keep in mind, so we wrote it with a question like, how do you overcome a gatekeeper who's holding you back from meeting with the stakeholder decision maker? That might be one job to be done. So you take your content, which is most likely around some kind of a model, and you break it up, you chunk it, you bite size it, you micro-learning it. Not just with that job to be done in mind, but you break it up for the other jobs to be done that also might apply to it. And you tag it in your system. There's metadata, there's descriptions, and there's tags you can put on into most LMSs when you're dropping in content. And that way, if someone searches in your system for that very common question or challenge, that will come up as an option to answer their question. Now, that's a micro-learning approach to building instructional design. Guess what you still do? You still did like SailPoint did. You still create the Centerline Project Management Fundamentals course. The thing that people still need to go through to prepare for the certification they have to take, that still teaches them all those principles. but you build it with micro learning in mind, and you tag those smaller pieces. The cool thing about micro learning too is if things change, you can, if you need to change an example, or if the policy changes, because project management, there's an institute that, you know, it has specific rules to follow. So if those things change, you can just change one or two of the micro learning pieces instead of the whole learning experience. So that's just another example of how to do that effectively. Sorry, Daryl, you're going to say.
Yeah, so let's bring in the sales. So there may be some people in the audience who are sales type or responsible for sales enablement. So think about the basic skills that a sales professional needs to be successful, and how are you going to measure them? So, you know, how do you move something from a marketing qualified lead to a sales qualified lead? How do you overcome objections? All those things that are part of the basic responsibility of a salesperson. Qualifying the lead, getting to the root cause. What's the real business problem? Who's the procurement approver? You know, all the basics that are part of it. So being able to use microlearning allows you to measure. You can build up those skill sets through repetitive practice over and over. Maybe there's some coaching along the way that goes along with a series of these webinars. And how do you measure it? Well, gee, what's my time to first close? What's my average transaction? What's my time to second close? You know, what's my drop-off rate, my loss rate? All these metrics that salespeople track. It's very easy to set up a continuum of learning that progresses in mastery as someone becomes more and more skilled as a sales professional. Let's even go outside of a training world, and let's talk about, and then we'll probably want to open up Trey on to see if we can offer some help to them. But a last thing I would think about is, in a former position I had at another company, we had context-based microlearning embedded within the product. So imagine that. If I'm on a particular screen or view or whatever your user interface is like, and you're trying to decide how I fill out something, you might have a piece of microlearning content readily accessible. You know, there's that question mark. Click the question mark, and maybe there's a little video that comes up and says, here's the things you might want to consider, whatever the training might look like. But some products or processes where you're using online digital assets might lend themselves very well to this concept of microlearning in the context of the job. You know what you're asking about. You're right on the screen. You're right on the view. You're about to do something. Oh, shoot. What do I do now? And here it is, savior of the day.
Excellent. I love that. And as you were describing the levels and mastery moving up, guess what we call that today? We call it gamification. Now, that also is maybe a newer buzzword, but it's not new. The way people have always received mastery by moving from one belt, right? Karate, Six Sigma, to the next belt or level. And you don't progress until you've proved proficiency in those. But now you add technology to that. You add a dashboard, a leaderboard, you add rewards, badges, and points to that same process. And guess what you have? You have gamification. So that is, by the way, that's another great way to use microlearning, is in a gamification format, when you have different levels to people go through. If you're a gamer, guess what you engaged in? Microlearning through gamification, because you are learning.
Somebody asked, they joined a little bit late, might be worth refreshing if you can in a very quick survey type answer. What is microlearning? Your definition was best. So that we can set the stage for asking them what their challenge might be and how we might be able to help them.
So my definition, I quoted some others as well, but my definition is that microlearning is more than a collection of small learning nuggets. It is also the time in between, or baby steps, that is necessary to achieve proficiency in the desired skill or behavior. So that, again, that's after my research, that's how I've put it down together as a definition. So should we jump to group massage?
I think that'd be a good idea. Hopefully, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the person that asked that, but hopefully that helped.
Rachel, I think. And
I believe
Rachel,
that was a
you'll get the recording as well, and in which I give some definitions of other folks that have given definitions of microlearning. And if you Google it, by the way, you'll find a lot of great definitions.
About 1 million of them.
Yeah, sure. Which is one of the negatives of the Google microlearning approach, right? Is how do you know which is the best answer that you can pull from, besides the one that everyone clicks on the most, which is naturally part of the algorithm. So this last section, guys, is for you. We're going to ask that one or two of you who's challenged, maybe you have a specific learning opportunity. How, tell us about it. We'd like one or two people to raise their hands and say, here's the situation I have. And then we as a group, not just the two of us, Daryl and I, we're going to ask you guys to add your input on and how we can help them and work through. That's why it's group massage. How do we get that work, that knot out of their back that's challenging them? So who wants to go in the chat? Anyone have a specific learning challenge that they want to apply micro learning to, that they can bring up and we can work on it together?
Be brave. Don't be bashful.
Okay, Andrea says, I will. She's the first one. Okay, Andrea, go ahead. Write it in. We'll give you some time to write it in. And I don't think we have the ability to make Andrea a speaker, do we, Stephanie?
I think that we actually might be able to do that.
We can make Andrea Calloway our first person. And Andrea, hopefully it's okay for you. You don't have to put your camera on, but you can speak up and tell us. It'd be a little easier to interact with you. And the rest of you folks, don't jump off. We're going to require, there's a saying I have, which is the community is the new expert. There's no longer a sage on the stage.
Okay, so Andrea, I gave you permission to talk to us. So if you want to go ahead and explain a little bit about your learning challenge.
Okay, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm excited. So we have implemented a new system, the department-wide. We're a huge organization, about 300,000 plus people, global. And we used and we implemented a system called Mercury to help our client servers, our people facing the customers, to implement their data in the system for new work, for maintaining the work. And we've had to do this over several years. It's been through waves in different countries. So we created training to first show them how to use it, and also what the differences are between the old system and the new system. And I came to the company late. I've only been with the company for about 8-9 months, and this has been ongoing now for several years. So the training was already underway once I got there. So it consisted of about 9 e-learning modules, each about 30 minutes a piece. And then there was also there was also instructor-led content. So those were the big pieces that we would, and then there of course were webinars on the side for people who needed more of a demonstration. So that was the major content. Now we've almost fully implemented it, this new system, and we're still having a lot of problems with people using it correctly.
Yep.
It's not very user-friendly. It's not intuitive. So, and a lot of the people don't use it frequently. They're kind of infrequent users. They'll come back to it when they need to. So we're trying to implement microlearning. We have some microlearning videos already that are just very quick. But it seems that they want to get away from also, from formal training, from formal instructor-led training. They want to solely focus on, and when I say they, I mean leadership, wants to solely focus on microlearning, but we're having difficulties with how this microlearning should be organized for people to make the most of it. Also, maybe some of the forms that this microlearning is taking, because we, as many other people brought up, some people don't even know how to use the system, so they still have to return to it. So there still should be some practice, but really the ultimate issue is we don't know how to organize this microlearning and really what some of this microlearning should contain. It can't just be videos. There are other things, and right now our leadership is just kind of smacking everything down. They don't really they don't really like the I guess I shouldn't say creative, but I'm going to more creative approach to something other than just short videos. And these videos are like screencasts. So we have to organize this microlearning, and we also need to focus on what type of microlearning should be included so that all audiences can access it. But it can't be too specific either, because it's a global organization.
Yeah. So we have 9 minutes to solve all your problems.
There were many.
And I hope
might deserve a follow-on call.
It is exactly what I was thinking. So part of this process that I would follow, and Daryl, you probably do the same, it's just to excavate, where we'll need to ask more questions, like who are your learners? And I think it was Noah that quoted design thinking. I love design thinking and the importance of the empathy or personas, the user personas, understanding. Again, I said earlier, it's important to understand learning objectives, right? They need to learn this new system and the differences. That's learning objectives. Then the learner realities is more this design thinking part of it, or the empathy part of this. There's so much more. And then you sounds like you also have this challenge of SMEs and or leaders that think they know better and think that because they watch YouTube that everyone would want to watch just YouTube, although YouTube and videos are effective if done right. So let's take a look at some of the answers. What do you think, Daryl? I mean, do you want to?
Yeah, I've got, there's a phrase, again, we want to see what some of the other people are saying, and I was looking through as well. So Andrea, here's the first thing that comes to my mind. There were so many, I was taking a few notes trying to decide which one to offer you a suggestion on. So the first one that comes to mind is think the day in the life. So these people that are having to do this job, I do not know how much needs assessment you've done, how much task analysis you've done. Very often we get taught we're supposed to do this in formal training, and then you get out in the real world and you're doing it on the fly. You're still doing it. You still know what these people do in their day-to-day task. Map out the day in the life responsibilities, the roles, the tasks, the behaviors, even if it's just back of the napkin, next, and show a sequence of activities that somebody might have to do to help you begin to dig, to be able to do that research that will allow you to compartmentalize types of training. So that's the treatment approach. Yeah. I think the biggest one, I will share with you what I did at SailPoint. So when I was hired at SailPoint about 3 years ago, I brought in this vision, which was going to take education beyond the primarily instructor-led training with limited e-learning and expand it out to be all things for all people across the ecosystem, not immediately, but over time. That meant I had to be an evangelist. I had to get that executive buy-in to this vision of what learning and development could be like, not only for partners, not only for customers, and not only for employees. And that meant I had to pitch a business value approach to those executives. And once you have that, everything else falls like dominoes. So, how am I going to do it? How am I going to scale? How am I going to manage costs? Do I have to go hire an army? I've had everything from 2 people to 200 people. At SailPoint, I have 20 in my entire team. And we're doing all of this because we scale out with a partner that helps us bring content to life. But all of that is possible because, one, I communicated a vision. I got the executives to buy into it. I got people excited enough that it became a bottoms-up approach. All I had to do was be the tip of the spear, getting interest, and everybody else talked themselves into it. So for those on my team who are on, that's the secret. Keep it to yourself. But anyway, that's kind of what you might consider. And then think about things in terms of day in the life. And in that day in the life, you mentioned something that caught my ear, which was an opportunity to use compare, contrast. So if there's differences from the old way of doing things or the old tools, own systems, own processes to the new, that provides a potential piece of content that you might do. If you've got SMEs out there who know the way it used to be done, who liked it, who don't want to change, and you can use microlearning to just singularly focus in with brevity on that specific component that changed, you might get them to come on board, because guess what? The way it was before isn't there anymore, and they're going to have to adapt.
Love it. And looking at, so Sky, thank you for sharing. Andrea, if you're looking at the chat, Sky Toland talks about, they found that people love the self-paced dynamics of learning, which, yes, microlearning does fall within that. So videos, if done right and done short enough, that answer, and this ties into what Noah was saying later on, which is using topic-based learning, which is what I refer to as job to be done type learning. If you tie those videos / self-paced short microlearning pieces as the, you can, contrast and comparison is good. As Daryl was saying, it's helpful to say this is different than what it was. So it's this, not that. If you do that in a fun way, by the way, you can have some fun with images and experiences. But you could also do video, but you don't have to. There's ways that you can use visuals, infographics that become a great tool for microlearning and as a reference point. So Andrea, we're not going to solve your problem in 3 minutes. But I did drop my link in, Andrea, if you want to set up a time to meet with me. This is what I do at ELB, and I help people with their strategies, including this one. It'd be great to work with your leadership on that, because they need to be helped to see the bigger picture.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, both of you, for your excellent advice, and thank you, everyone else in the chat. This has been so helpful.
The chat's been very good. I wish I could keep up with it. So it's been fantastic.
There was another one. I don't know if in 3 minutes I saw right after Andrea, somebody else popped up real quick too and said, I have one.
Well, we are not going to be
New
able to-
database for, someone said, I do, new database right after Andrea, 12:47 p.m. The whole name isn't shown, so I can't see who it was.
Well, we are
I
definitely
think
not
that
gonna
was from Patrice, but now you only have 2 minutes to answer that question. So I don't know if we're going to have time to tackle that
Patrice,
today.
If I were to give you any advice, a new database, that means you have to teach people on a new database. Again, the nice thing about it is it comes down to the topics, topic-based or jobs to be done. If you break it up, try not to teach them in big chunks. It causes cognitive load. Break it down into problem statements or questions as that the data that they will be learning about will solve. And that's one way to approach it in a microlearning approach. Break it down to its smallest pieces that can stand on its own, put it into a format or statement that they will relate to. So thank you, everyone.
Guys, take care. Bye-bye.